The first full week of Baltimore Ravens 2022 training camp is officially in the books, and we dive into takeaways from that week with a very special guest next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Allstriker of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen today. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not a self-help line either. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide, and they have a special offer for listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. And we're here on a Thursday edition episode, the first full week of Baltimore Ravens training camp wrapping up from Wednesday to Wednesday. And so now here to talk about the first week of training camp, what happened during Wednesday's practice, is the managing editor over at Baltimore Beatdown, also writes for BaltimoreRavens.com, Kyle Barber. Kyle, I appreciate you hopping on here. We had a great conversation the first time. I had to bring you back for more. How you doing?
Doing well. Training camp is going nice and hot, and players are starting to get into the dog days of summer.
Yeah, and it can be some scorching days out there at training camp for the players, for obviously the media guys out there like yourself. I mean, how's it been out there for the first week?
I mean, I enjoy it. I like the sun. I like the summer, but it does get a little bit hot, and the water bottles and the Gatorade starts to get picked out rather quickly for the media side.
Yeah, I bet. And I know for Wednesday's practice, it was a long one. It was a physical one, definitely. I wanted to start there and just ask about what you took away from yesterday's practice. I mean, let's start off with the offensive side of the ball. Was this a day where you thought the offense got the better of the defense? Because we heard on Tuesday it was the defense getting the better of the offense.
Yeah, I think the offense ended up winning, quote unquote, the day. I thought that overall they had a few more plays than the defense did. Lamar Jackson connected with Rashad Bateman on multiple throws, and including a touchdown. He had Mark Andrews for one or two touchdowns, one being in the red zone drills, and a second one occurring with about a 60-yard play in total. He hit Mark Andrews, who slipped through coverage for about a 40-yard gain. And I don't think he would have been touched for the final 20 yards there. Offense as a whole looked sharp, and enough plays were made that I would definitely say the offense kind of won the day.
And I think one of those players who we heard a lot about who won the day was Isaiah Likely, who got the better of Kyle Hamilton 3 times. We heard. I mean, what'd you see from him yesterday?
Yeah, so Hamilton went one-on-one against them, and John Harbaugh talked a lot about this throughout a press conference recently, that it's a drill that the defense is wearing the ankle weights. They don't have any advantages. They are at a disadvantage. There's no pass rushers. There's nobody blocking the passing lanes, and so you really go in there and you're just kind of hoping to hang on at that point. And Kyle Hamilton lined up with Isaiah Likely. The first one was a tough physical battle that Likely just got the better of him on a zig route. The second one, Isaiah Likely had a step on Hamilton. And then the third one was really tight coverage downfield, but the angle was just better for Isaiah Likely to jump up and make a play and secure the catch on the third one. But I think Hamilton hung in well. And as we know, Likely has been, one of the big camp standouts so far, and the rookie's shown up practice after practice. So we'll see if that's because, he's just become a talented NFL player, just within the last few months, or if Hamilton might be a little bit slow in his approach. But I think overall, Likely's looking the real deal. I don't want to put a stamp on it before even a preseason game's been under wraps, but Likely's has a lot of buzz about him, and I think for good reason.
Yeah, and I want to talk a bit about you with Lamar Jackson, because he's a player that obviously has had a pretty good training camp, all things considered. And were there any throws yesterday, Kyle, that you thought really stood out?
I think he had a sharp throw to Bateman, and unfortunately that was against Hamilton in coverage. It looked to be in zone coverage, and Hamilton was in position for the play, jumped, outstretched arm and everything to get the pass break up, and it went right over his fingertips and right into the arms of Rashad Bateman. I thought that was impressive, being able to throw over a tall, lengthy safety like Hamilton is. and that was a pretty sharp one there. That connection, I think, was probably one of the best ones on the day. He also connected with Mark Andrews, but those were in red zone drills, and the touchdown wasn't exactly a most challenging one. He got Rashad Bateman, I believe, on a back shoulder throw as well, and that's been really the talk of this training camp is Lamar's progression as a passer. He worked with quarterback guru Adam Dedeaux, and that's been talked about a lot, especially because he's been at training camp the past few days. But overall, his accuracy looks to have been improved, and he's making the throws where he needs to be, and it's just been an impressive showing for him. It's tough to put that player as a stock up because he's the franchise quarterback, arguably one of the best players in the NFL, but when a player develops a trait that, was kind of a requirement to take the next step as a player, it's hard to not put him in as a stock up player.
Right. It's almost like Mark Andrews or Justin Tucker. Like, how high can their stocks really go when they're that good already? But you're right. There's always room for improvement with these guys, even if it feels like they are literally the best player on the team, which for Lamar Jackson, I mean, he's such a transcendent talent. But you mentioned Lamar Jackson having his quarterback guy there. I mean, how's that dynamic been with him being in training camp for these past couple of days?
Yeah, they've looked sharp. And with Dedeaux, it's an interesting dynamic. I don't think I've ever seen this happen before. I don't believe Joe Flacco, when I was covering the Ravens, had a quarterback coach specific to him, let alone showing up for training camp. But overall, Greg Roman talked about it, and he said it's been a benefit to have Dedeaux there, and that they're talking with one another after meetings and kind of going through what their thoughts are and concepts and how they believe quarterbacks should be, coached and instructed and utilized in the NFL. And I thought that was kind of revealing into it's a welcome addition, and it's not this distraction or awkward like power struggle or conflict, and that's the best thing you can hope for with contract negotiations going on with Lamar, and there already being a quarterback coach with the Ravens in James Urban. But it sounds by all accounts that things are going well, and like I said, Lamar's gained in his accuracy, and it doesn't sound like that come out of the blue.
Right. And one of the great things about having these training camp practices, especially if you're the Ravens, is this offense is not going up against the bottom 5 defense in practice. This defense is not going up against the bottom 5 offense in practice. It's the whole iron sharpens iron mentality here. But Kyle, during yesterday's practice, how did the defense look?
Yeah, they made their fair share of plays as well. Lamar Jackson was intercepted again by Demarion Pepe Williams. He was targeting Mekhi Polk a little bit downfield, and one of the two had to make a play on it. Mekhi Polk looked like he mistimed his jump a little bit, wasn't in the best position to make a catch, and instead Pepe Williams was able to come down with the ball. Alongside that, there were about 3 sacks that would have occurred. Of course, they're not going to actually hit Lamar Jackson or Tyler Huntley in practice. So instead, you kind of throw your hand up like you made a play. And Brent Urban was definitely one to throw the hand up, and he lets everybody know when he makes a play or gets the tackle for loss or a sack. Along with him was Justin Madubuike and Vince Beagle, who's been an interesting player for the Ravens so far, working in as an outside linebacker. I believe the Ravens traded a 7th round, maybe a comp for him, and he's looked sharp throughout the training camp thus far. And like I said, the defense made their fair share of plays as well.
Yeah, were there any other standouts over the course of the day that you could think of?
Yeah, Jalen Moore is my person right now for wide receiver number 5. He was able to make catches with Lamar Jackson, Tyler Huntley, and Anthony Brown. So he was circling in all through the 11-on-11 section, which was impressive. He also went up against Denzel Williams in the 1-on-1 and came down with a 40-yard touchdown. They start that drill at the 40-yard line, and made a tough catch in good coverage by Denzel Williams on a fade route, on a 9 route as well, sprinting downfield. And those ones are tough when it's that close, and, the cornerback or the defensive back knows that this is the route. He's going straight. I just have to make a better play on it. And they both leapt up into the air, and Jalen Moore came down with the ball. And Greg Roman afterwards, when I asked him, he said that Jalen Moore is in a position to make this team right now. And the Ravens look like they might carry 5, maybe 6 wide receivers. And I think Jalen Moore is very much in contention with the rest of the group to make the team. I've been impressed by him.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into Jalen Moore a bit more throughout the rest of the show here, Kyle. But I did want to talk a bit about the conditions yesterday because it was one of the physical practices of the week. Also, the weather. I mean, just as another scorcher out there. There were some cramps that were going on. Kyle Hamilton left practice early. A couple other guys getting worked on. Are those just cramps? Are there any other injury concerns that we should be aware about here?
I believe with David Vereen, and I think he was just suffering from cramps. That's what it kind of looked to be. I'm uncertain if Kyle Hamilton was just cramps, though. During the 11 on 11 section, he did have a pass breakup against Isaiah Likely. He dove to make the play on that one. So he finally did make the big play that you were hoping for throughout camp. But when he leapt up and made the play, he came down pretty hard, and it looked like he was stretching out his back on the sideline. And then afterwards, he jumped back in for the 7-on-7 section, and about halfway through the play, when Tylan Wallace was kind of running through on his route, he kind of pulled up a little bit, slowed up, and it didn't look so much like cramps, but it's uncertain as to whether it was an ankle thing or if it was just cramps, because you never know when they're just pointing down at their leg, if that's a knee, if that's a calf, a foot, an ankle, anything and everything that happens to be involved on that. But I'm uncertain if that was just cramps. It could be something more, and that's something to monitor, I think, for the coming practices.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on for sure. And again, all things considered, the Ravens have been relatively healthy so far. Obviously, Devin Duvernay suffering that thigh bruise during the Saturday stadium practice. But other than that, the Ravens, knock on wood, have been relatively healthy throughout the course of training camp so far. But we still have a ton to talk about here on the show. We're going to be talking about takeaways from the first week of training camp with Kyle coming up next in our second segment. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Built Bar. And if you haven't tried the Built Bar Puffs yet, you're really missing out on one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor in the delicious cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right, Built has done it again. And there's a new favorite in town, the cookie dough chunk puffs that have a light, chewy texture. There are real cookie dough chunks in there. And of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. So you have all the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories. They have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them as well. And like all Built Bars, new cookie dough chunk puff is again covered in 100% real chocolate. That's the important part of this whole thing. That means they're healthy and they're tasty. And also, Built has all their bars made with proteins that your body absorbs more efficiently, and they provide a ton of health benefits. You're going to love the new cookie dough chunk puff. So go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15. You get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oshek still here with Kyle Barber of Baltimore Beatdown and BaltimoreRavens.com. And Kyle, there are a lot of things to take away from this first week of training camp. Obviously, there have been guys who have stepped up in a big way, others who might have to show a bit more moving forward. But I just wanted to start, obviously, with the big fish, with Lamar Jackson. What have your takeaways been from him over this first week and what you've seen?
Yeah, as I mentioned, his accuracy's improved. He's had multiple back shoulder throws, and I think that's where the Ravens are hoping to be able to utilize something more out of Lamar and out of the offense. He enjoys throwing to his tight ends. He's got big tight ends on this roster, with Mark Andrews, of course, being the All-Pro. He has Nick Boyle, who's been on the roster, and then they drafted Charlie Kolar and Isaiah Likely. And while Charlie is out currently with a sports hernia that he's expected to have surgery on, Isaiah Likely's been there, and Lamar's had his fair share of targets, of course, to the tight end unit. So it's all coming down to the wide receivers, which fans have always wanted to know more about, know expectations of, and regarding. And we've seen some big plays out of them. James Brochet's had some great catches. Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, prior to the thigh bruise injury, looked sharp in camp. And I think that's kind of going to expand the offense into where defenses will have to account for the wide receivers. They'll have to account for outside the hashes and not just double Mark Andrews and call it a day. And that's what I've been most impressed by with Lamar. The speed is still there. He was running onto the outside midway through practice. He had a blocker or two with him as he kind of scrambled out of the pocket and was looking to make a play. And Vince Beagle went to kind of make a play on him, get his two hands on, and Lamar shook him out of his shoes and ran to the side. And one of the players kind of came up to Vince Beagle afterwards, and he's like, you knew not to do that. You knew that was a bad idea, and you still went with it anyways. I'm paraphrasing here, but he got pointed at and laughed at a little bit, because Lamar is just electric on the football field. And seeing him when he finally turns it on, you can tell that there's just the extra gear that nobody else on that football field has. He is by far the most dynamic player, arguably in the NFL, and being able to see when he, downshifts to accelerate and quickly upshifts and gets the full speed going is rather entertaining.
Yeah, that Beagle play almost reminds me of the LJ Fort play when he was in Philadelphia, where Lamar kind of juked him out. He kind of rolls over. Do you remember that? Where he was just rolling, and the Eagles teammates, LJ Fort's Eagles teammates, are like, "Oh my god, like did that really just happen?" So it kind of feels like that. But I told you we were going to talk about the wide receivers a little bit more, Kyle. Seems like the first four guys are pretty set in stone. You have Bateman, Duvernay, you have Prochet, and obviously Wallace. Those guys they're there. But there's the question of that fifth wide receiver role. Now, you've mentioned Jalen Moore as kind of your guy right now, but in the event, I'll kind of make it a game. In the event they keep six, let's say they keep six here, who would be your 5 and 6? Because there's Mekhi Polk, there's Shamar Bridges, there's Slade Bolden. There are a lot of guys. There's Benjamin Victor as well. So who would your 5-6 be based off what you've seen so far?
Right now through camp, what I've seen is Jalen Moore is arguably my 5th, and I think I have a competition between Benjamin Victor and Shamar Bridges. They're both a similar body type. They're bigger receivers, so they're not fitting the same mold as the majority of the Ravens wide receivers, which is a little bit smaller. I think that both of them have made a reasonable amount of plays, and they've had my attention. Shamar Bridges has been getting a lot of attention as of late. I believe he was put as a stock-up player for the Athletics Jeff Zrebiec, and so I think a lot of traction has been gained by that. I'm not yet on that kind of Shamar Bridges train. I think that I expect to see a little bit more if he's going to stand out, especially with Benjamin Victor. I've seen a fair amount of plays on him today. He caught a touchdown pass against Kyle Fuller and got more than a half step on him before he scored on the one-on-one section as well, which, like I said, the DB is at a disadvantage there. But, being able to break off on a route and lose the cornerback entirely is something you just kind of take stock of. And Benjamin Victor has that ability. And I like the speed and I like the size. And I think those two are the guys right now that are in strong contention with one another. And it's all going to come down to the preseason. There's a lot of football left in training camp alone, but there are 3 preseason games for these wide receivers to make a name for themselves. We've seen it a lot throughout Ravens training camp history where a player is going to have excel in training camp. They're going to make a lot of good catches. They're going to make a lot of tough ones. But once the live rounds come out in preseason and there's tacklers, there's more physicality involved. And, the quarterback is getting pressured more consistently or more frequently or in ways that, they weren't experiencing throughout training camp because they can't get hit in training camp. All of a sudden things start to take shape and you go from a guy that has 5 catches in training camp and 2 touchdowns to a guy that has 3 targets, 2 catches for 13 yards. And you went, well, what happened to that guy? I expected to see more out of him. And, every media member is out here writing about this guy being, something impressive and something to take stock of. And I didn't hear his name called on the broadcast. So it's going to come down to preseason in my mind, and may the best wide receiver win.
Yeah, and we've heard about, those like wide receiver training camp / preseason heroes. I mean, Miles Boykin being a pretty big example of that, who did have some nice preseason flashes, but, everybody under the sun was talking about, how good Miles Boykin looked. Jeremy Butler, if you want to go back even a bit further, that was a Ravens legend, Jeremy Butler, who you could talk about there. But it feels like hopefully one of these guys will stand out, but it does feel like the Ravens have kind of gone with that mold of a bigger bodied wide receiver, to your point, Kyle, about some of the other wide receivers being a little bit on the smaller side. That's why Julio Jones, I think, was talked about so much as a potential option because of his big bodied ability. But when talking about the preseason, we'll get into that a bit more in the final segment. I did want to dive into a bit about the left guard competition, because that really seems like when everybody's healthy, that's the one position where you say there's some competition there. And I know the 3 guys competing, Ben Cleveland, Ben Powers, Tyree Phillips. Now, Ben Cleveland kind of just got back on the field. But what have you seen out of those guys so far?
Right. Ben Powers, I think, is still firmly in the lead, but as we've said, preseason is going to determine a lot. That's another area that I don't really want to judge too much until preseason occurs and see what they can handle. Once defensive linemen are actually trying to fight through their way to get after Lamar or get after Tyler Huntley, whoever's, the signal caller for the preseason games, that's when it becomes far more important. Ben Powers was kind of heralded for his communication and his ability to, play smart and make the right calls and know what to do and how to adjust to the play call and the line shifts and protection issues. And so that's kind of the guy that's been looked at so far. I think Tyree Phillips has looked very good as well out in camp. camp. I like his size and physicality a little bit more personally for the left guard position, but overall, I think it's down to those two right now. Of course, that doesn't mean Ben Cleveland is out of this. His size is, the biggest of those three, and he's quite a mountain of a man, in fact. But I need to see him playing consistently, and that's a guy that I'm really looking forward to seeing in preseason. Preseason is just going to be important, and I kind of keep mentioning that because those are where you make or break the Ravens roster.
No, you're exactly right. And I even go back to like Michael Pierce when he was a rookie undrafted guy where he pretty much made the Ravens roster in the final preseason game in that year. So it literally can come down to those final few quarters, final few snaps in the preseason. And that's something I'm excited to talk about with you about in the final segment. But I do want to ask a little bit about the differences between obviously these non-padded practices and then once the pads come on. Obviously there is an uptick in physicality with those. What have you seen when the pads come on? Have there been guys who maybe weren't as visible in the non-padded practices that really started to pop to you once the pads came on?
I think Kyle Hamilton's a guy that, the more physicality that's allowed, the more he demonstrates why he's such a premier player and was drafted, number 14 overall. He's a guy that I really enjoy watching when the pads come on. And he looked, like I said, up and down today. But overall, I think, he looks solid in coverage. And it looks like the Ravens are trying to decide where they want to best utilize him in his hybrid role. Other guys that I think kind of stood out are the running backs. When they're finally able to lower the shoulder a little bit and get a little bit more physical, I'm more intrigued by. Corey Clement was the running back that the Ravens just recently signed, and I liked a lot of what he did today. He had some good runs, he had some physical runs, and fits kind of a bigger body type that they might be missing with Gus Edwards still, uncertain for week one, as was latest reported. I think those two have been kind of impressive, and just watching offensive line play, you can notice a little bit more of Travis Jones, his size, and when they're doing the one-on-one pass rush versus protection drills, I've seen him defeat some offensive linemen, and you're really able to experience more of the physicality as a whole there. Marlon Humphrey, of course, knowing him as a physical player, when the pads come on, he seems to be a little bit more amped up, and the entire defense as a whole kind of looks that way.
Right, and it makes sense. I mean, you mentioned kind of even with the one-on-one drills, you mentioned with the defensive backs, they have the ankle weights there, as you said. And I think for the defense, when the pads come on, the physicality gets ratcheted up. I think that you can really see a difference when it comes to that. But I do want to kind of get more. You mentioned the back shoulder throws. That was a takeaway for a lot of people in terms of Lamar Jackson emphasizing those. What's your takeaway been with those throws and how he's looked on those throws?
He looks sharp, he looks accurate, and the decision-making is right. There's been some solid coverage, of course, by this defensive back group, and being able to throw in tight windows is going to be important for training camp and all throughout the regular season, and not just for this season, but for the length of Lamar Jackson's career. You got to be able to throw in tight windows and make the tough completions, and sometimes they don't have the speedster that's a step on the guy, and you gotta be able to make those throws. I think they've looked sharp, and like I said, I think that really opens up an offensive scheme that allows for them to not have to experience so many 8-man boxes, 7-man boxes, because they're going to have to be wary of the wide receivers making a play and Lamar Jackson being able to air it out like he's known to do within Baltimore, but apparently not anywhere else in the NFL.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like that. And I know that part of the whole, Lamar Jackson has a cannon for an arm. We've seen him air the ball out deep. Obviously, Marquise Brown was a big part of that. Obviously, he's now no longer in Baltimore. But there's almost this sense within me, Kyle, that it feels like the Ravens want to utilize their running backs out of the backfield a little more in the pass game. And obviously, that can be an extension of the run game. Do you get that same feeling?
I think that's something that they want to utilize, but I haven't seen too much of it thus far. It kind of looks like the safety valve option on most of the plays, but there have been some designed roles for the running backs and fullbacks into creating an opportunity for them to exploit a defense that's playing zone and not focusing on it, or has too many defensive backs on the field, and a bull rushing Patrick Ricard is not going to be pleasant to tackle if you're a smaller cornerback or DB. So I think that they have the opportunity for that, and they have some players with some good hands. Mike Davis, as a veteran, he's been utilized as kind of a pass catching back and a pass protection veteran running back. So that's an opportunity. Tyler Beatty has some hands. I'd like to see more out of him, though. Personally, I think he's at an all right camp. You can't put stock down, of course, on a rookie, let alone the last pick of the draft. But I just want to see more out of him. It's not that he hasn't disappointed. It's just I know he's talented. We all know that he has an ability to carve out a role within this offense. But I need to see a little bit more of that before I get that feeling.
Right, you set me up perfectly to go to break, because we'll make it backward. We dive into some guys that Kyle wants to see a bit more from in training camp. We'll talk about the preseason, some defensive takeaways, and more. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about BetterHelp, and this episode of Locked On Ravens is sponsored by BetterHelp, and life can throw you a ton of curveballs, and in those times, it's really important to have someone to help talk you through it, and life can be full of twists and turns. It's important to show up for yourself through it all, and BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours, and look, I know there have been times in my life where I've really benefited from having someone talking me through things, and sometimes in those situations, therapy can be beneficial, and so BetterHelp is not a crisis line. It's not even self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. You can log into your account anytime, send a message to your therapist, and it's more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is available for it. It's a great way to invest in yourself. You can visit their website. You can read their testimonials that are posted there daily. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp, and they're recruiting additional therapists in all 50 states, and they have a special offer for listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, of course, still here with Kyle Barber. And Kyle, I want to go back to your point you made right as we headed into our last break there, because there are some players, obviously a bunch of standouts. We've heard about all the standouts, but are there any guys, you mentioned Tyler Beatty a little bit there, who you think you want to see a bit more out of as maybe the next week or two goes along here in training camp?
Yeah, I think Kyle Fuller is a cornerback that I'd like to see a little bit more out of. I think he's struggled a little bit so far within playing against some of these better players that the Ravens have to offer. Rashad Bateman has gotten the better of him. I believe the highlight that was posted on Wednesday was Rashad Bateman scoring a touchdown against Fuller in coverage during the red zone drill. Benjamin Victor's caught a touchdown against him during the one-on-one. And I just need to see a little bit more out of Kyle Fuller. He's a veteran cornerback. He's coming off a little bit of a shaky year. And I think putting that, being able to put that behind him and have some better football with this team would be a little bit more impressive. In that same note, I would also like to see Tylan Wallace kind of step up a little bit more. We talked about Jalen Moore and how I see him as the number 5. I think he's contesting for the number 4 spot right now. I haven't seen a whole lot of plays out of Tylan Wallace. I have a little bit of a rooting interest for him. I just see him as a guy that I'd like to, see the Ravens draft and develop and turn into a better receiver and be on the field more. And that's a player that I don't have a whole lot of notes on. I don't have a whole bunch of 8.16 completion against this person in coverage. That's the way I'm writing my notes, and I haven't had a whole lot of number 16 on my notes. So those are the two guys that I'm hopeful and expecting to see more as training camp and the preseason moves along.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned Fuller. The back end of that secondary has so many depth pieces that you can talk about. I mean, the safety position right now is loaded for them. But I want to kind of go to the front 7 a little bit and ask what you've seen out of those guys, the defensive line, those edge rushers, and obviously the inside linebackers. Are there any guys there that have either stood out or you'd maybe want to see more out of?
I think, as I mentioned, Vince Beagle is a guy that I think Ravens fans should keep their eyes on. He's looked sharp thus far. Travis Jones has been highly heralded by Michael Pierce. He was giving him huge amounts of praise during the open locker room session, and then when he was at the podium a couple days later. And Brent Urban mentioned him as well. Brent Urban is another guy that I kind of have as a stock up kind of guy. I've seen a lot out of him. He had a sack, like I mentioned, on the Wednesday practice, and overall, you see those big arms, and I think when preseason comes around, you're going to see him and Travis Jones and Calais Campbell, if they were to all be on the field during a preseason game. Of course, that's a big question mark, of course, but getting those big arms up there, there's going to be some batted passes for sure. Guys that I'd like to see a little bit more out of, I'd say Michael Pierce, and it's not because he hasn't looked bad. I definitely don't want to come in here and say that like he hasn't, you need to see more out of him. we know how physical and talented Michael Pierce is, and how he developed into more of a pass rushing role with the Vikings before he took a year off for COVID, and then he suffered a triceps injury that kind of stopped his season after I believe 7 games. So I want to see more out of him, and I think that's definitely coming. He's looked sharp throughout camp, but it's just about wanting to see more out of a guy that just got a big payday out of him. Another guy I think to kind of look through, I mentioned Tyler Beatty. That's a player that I just kind of want to see a little bit more out of, and kind of the whole running backs as a whole. That's when they're able to shine. That's where the physicality comes into. Now you have to tackle the running back. You don't get a training camp, put 2 hands on him and be like, yeah, I would have wrapped him up here. It's like, no. Let's see you wrap him up, and let's see you take him down, because there's a big difference, as Ravens fans know, between an almost tackle and an actual tackle, for good reasons and for bad regarding that one. Malik Harrison, I'd like to see what kind of role that he's going to be utilized in. He was at last year cross-training between outside linebacker and now he's looking to be more back into the inside linebacker role, I think. So that's another player that maybe keep your eye on throughout the preseason and how he's being utilized.
Yeah, and I want to also do, Kyle, kind of like a rookie report thing with you. We've talked about Kyle Hamilton, Travis Jones, some of the guys that we haven't really touched on. Tyler Linderbaum, obviously, the rookie center. Daniel Falele, another guy who, big mountainous guy, but, I know that he might be behind a couple people. Jalen Armour-Davis, Jordan Stout. I mean, Jordan Stout has had a lot of seemingly booming punts. I mean, what have you seen from these rookies in this rookie class?
I'm so happy we get to the special teams portion of this. I think every single person that knows me knows that special teams is one of my favorite things to talk about, and Jordan Stout is looking great. I'm excited about him. Watching him at the stadium practice, being up in the press box and being able to see the balls at eye level when he's skyrocketing them was really entertaining. He had some great hang time on them, but what was more important is the placement of them. He had one bounce out at the 1-yard line. 2 punts later, it was bouncing out at the 3-yard line. And then two practices later, he hits a 60-yard field goal when he's standing there working with Sam Cook. Yes, a 60-yard field goal. Ridiculous. And he's just looked sharp. His holds have been fine. I haven't heard any complaints from teammates, and I haven't seen any poor or failed holds on it. So overall, he's looking the part, and the Ravens got the guy I think that they were hoping for in Jordan Stout. And I am all for talking punting rankings and anything and everything special teams. So I'm happy we got to the Jordan Stout part. But as for the other guys, I think Tyler Linderbaum has looked fast. He is what they talked about in being a slightly undersized center, but the speed, agility, quickness, and intelligence to make up for any lack of size. I don't see a whole lot of that, but he was fast. I saw on a screen pass, he went flying out to a spot, and I was like, I truly was like, is that the running? No, that's the offensive lineman that's coming in on the screen pass, because he saw the pass go that way, and the running back was behind him on it, and he was looking to see when the ball got caught so he could legally start blocking. And he's flying through, and he makes the block. I think it was on Malik Harrison, and just started pushing him. And that speed, that momentum, and he was just able to open up a running lane for the running back on that. And that was something that I was really impressed by. That's somebody that, of course, like I've said multiple times already, watching the preseason. You don't get to watch the exciting, flashy stuff in the preseason. You got to watch the offensive and defensive line, because that's when they're finally able to combat as best as they are. So Ravens fans, watch the offensive and defensive line if you want to know how things are going there. Daniel Faalele, I think, needs a little bit more work. He's a little bit raw in his technique, and I would like to see him use more of his strength and size and length and reach advantage to be more proficient at right tackle. I think he's perfectly fitted well with the Ravens, being able to have some tackle depth ahead of him, so he's not required right away to be utilized when there's Morgan Moses, Juwan James, Patrick McCary, and Ronnie Stanley on this roster for those tackle spots. Armour-Davis, I think, has showed up quite well. He's had some good coverage, and Demarion Pepe Williams has been solid in that. That's a guy that you heard so much about. He's a loud character, as some have wrote, and I would like to see him make as many plays as we've read about him and the excitement regarding him. But he had an interception on Lamar Jackson on Wednesday, so you can't say that he hasn't done nothing out there. He's looked sharp. He's made some plays. He's broken up some passes, and he got a pick on number 8, which is pretty darn good.
Yeah, and look, 11 players in that class, all super talented, all could technically make an impact if things bounce one way or the other with the ball. But Kyle, we did the rookie report. I want to kind of get into an undrafted rookie report here. Now, we've talked a bit about these undrafted receivers. Two guys I have making the Ravens final 53 right now are Jeremiah Moon and Zacoby McClain. I know Zacoby McClain had an interception himself on the day a couple days ago. But do you have anybody else in that undrafted rookie class you think has impressed you and is maybe pushing for a roster spot here?
I think Jeremiah Moon has an opportunity to. The Ravens are really thin at outside linebacker, and that's an opportunity for Moon to seize and take hold. He's had some good plays thus far, and overall, I think that would probably be my guy as well. For an opportunity to make the roster. He's been able to create pressure and generate pressure. I think a time or two happened against Daniel Faalele. So, he's able to get around with some speed and some quickness, and he's got his hand up and I believe deflected a pass or two over the last 7 practices. So that would kind of be my guy to keep an eye on for the UDFA class.
Okay, yeah, and exactly lined up with me, so we're on the same page there. But I promised you we were going to talk about the preseason. My final question for you, Kyle: what do you expect the Ravens to do with their starters and their stars in the preseason? Do we see any snaps from Lamar Jackson, any snaps from these stars, or do you expect the Ravens to be maybe the more cautious approach this year and just hold them out?
I think if we're going by the thought process of what training camp has been like, in which they slowly ramped it up from little to no contact to what it's been now, which is, pads have been on twice in the last 3 days, and they've been taking a very cautious approach. You see Devin Duvernay have a thigh bruise, and Harbaugh said on that Saturday night that he probably could have come back in, but they wanted to be cautious, and I think that's still kind of why he's not being out there, because there's no reason to risk a greater injury or more significant injury this early in training camp. I think that if it was more towards the regular season or towards the preseason, they might have him more active in training camp, but there's no reason to risk anything right now. And preseason is where they saw J.K. Dobbins suffer a season-ending injury. Throughout training camp, it was Gus Edwards and Marcus Peters. So I'm hard-pressed to see if they're going to have a lot of starters out there. I'm uncertain on who they would be. I don't think Lamar Jackson would be out there for preseason because he's in a contract year. I don't think he would personally want to risk it, but also the man loves football so much that maybe he wants to go out there and air out a pass or two and shake down a fourth string defensive lineman and put somebody on a poster, But overall, I don't expect we see many starters out there, especially for the amount of reps that you would maybe expect from a season or two prior.
Right, maybe it goes on a game by game basis where they maybe play him in the first game for a series or two, and then maybe they shut it down for the second and third games. But again, we'll see as we get closer to that. But I know with the injured players from last year, they are taking that very cautious approach. I think that is the right decision. Obviously, J.K. Dobbins wants to get back out there. The Ravens are saying, "Hold on a minute, let's slow it down a little bit." So I think for the Ravens, if they are cautious, I think that is completely okay. I think that reps are reps, but if they come at the cost of an injury, then it becomes more of a question of, well, is it worth it or not? But Kyle, I appreciate you hopping on here. Thank you so much for joining me again. Tell everybody where they can find you, what you're working on now too.
Absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at Kyle P. Barber. I do the Monday edition of Late for Work for BaltimoreRavens.com each week, so you can definitely check that out on BaltimoreRavens.com. I'm managing editor of Baltimore Beatdown, and I have a wonderful staff that's working on training camp stuff, covering press conferences, giving you all the information, and essentially competing with Kevin and Ravenswire, which is always entertaining to have us have this little crossover right now. It's a lot of fun. As for what I'm working on, I every year do a Kicking Crown article. I know that's not going to excite everybody, but I've taken all of the statistical data of kickers around the NFL, and I compile it into different charts and graphs and show just kind of the stats surrounding what kind of impresses for Justin Tucker, what kind of numbers he has, and what the rest of the NFL does too, because there's some talented kickers outside of Baltimore. I know that the Ravens love their kicker and they love Justin Tucker, and you see, Justin Tucker jerseys. It's not very frequent that you see a team's kicker be the jersey that's bought out by so many fans, but it definitely happens here, and I think that's kind of provoked what I started off, I believe, 4 years ago with the Kicking Crown, and it slowly has evolved into a bigger and greater piece. You can see like Justin Tucker's average miss kick distance is over 50 yards away. his average completion is like 45 yards. It's impressive. So I pull all those stats up, and you see him, and you see all the other kickers, and kind of see the greatness of what NFL kicking is. And that's one of my favorite articles to write every year.
Yeah, and one guy I'm interested to see on that, obviously Justin Tucker is one, but Evan McPherson, somebody who I think has the potential to be one of these great kickers. And I know it's a division rival in Cincinnati, but look, he had a phenomenal rookie season out of Florida. And so that's one guy I'll be looking out for in that article. But all the links to Kyle's work will be in the description below on YouTube. So be sure to follow him, check out his work. It is great stuff. I read his updates out here every day on the show. So you might have already been familiar with him through that, or through Ravens, or through Baltimore Beatdown. Kyle, thank you again so much. This was a great conversation. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the week. More training camp talk on the way, of course. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you back here tomorrow.